The NES and cassette tapes. They may both be nostalgic tech icons, but they don't actually go together, do they? Well, that was the plan to begin with. This is the Nintendo Advanced Video System, the original concept for the NES. As much of a computer as it was a console, it came with some sort of keyboard and a cassette recorder, alongside some really terrible looking early infrared wireless controllers. Nintendo, though, of course, ditched the whole idea, and this thing never saw the light of day apart from a tantalising display of the prototype in Nintendo New York, right? Well, actually, the NES as computer concept did see the light of day in Japan, with the launch of the Family Computer Keyboard and the Family Computer Basic cartridge in 1984. And here it is in the flesh, pretty much, an add-on that more or less turns the Famicom into an 8-bit home computer that you can program in BASIC. Observant viewers may also notice the honking great cassette player here too. Yes, this thing has a cassette port around the back that this tape player plugs into, allowing you to load and save games onto tape. The keyboard is actually surprisingly good quality, even though the keys are pretty small, but I know that some of you may be saying that, well, this isn't the NES, is it? It's the Famicom, whatever that is. They are basically the same thing, honestly, and this will work on the NES, it's just a lot easier to run it on the original Famicom. I'll explain a bit more later in the video. But let's get to the business of actually loading games on tape. That's what you're here for, and I have here a pre-prepared cassette with some games on, so let's slot that into the machine and get going. Loading is pretty easy to begin with, it's just a case of typing load and hitting enter before pressing play on the cassette player. And here we go, something I thought I'd never see on this system. I mean, loading games from tape was fairly common for lots of early 8-bit home computers, but I had no idea that Nintendo had ever flirted with this technology. What kind of games can we expect from this? Well, that is a good point. These aren't and never were expected to replace the type of games you'd get on cartridges. That's not what this is about. Family Computer Basic was aimed at learning to program in the programming language BASIC, homebrew coding, and that's what most of these games are focused on. The game that I'm loading now, apparently just called Crab Game, is part of a compilation released by Hudson Soft, the people who actually developed this for Nintendo. It came on cassette with an accompanying guidebook, and anyone who programmed in BASIC on other computers in the 80s will no doubt remember similar things for those systems. The quirk of Famicom Basic is that a lot of games load in two parts with graphics data separately, so let's load that now. Yeah, this takes a while. If you're wondering how this all works, well, the simple answer is the same way as every other machine that loaded from tape did. Tape was a popular medium for computer software in the 80s and well into the 90s and even beyond for 8-bit systems. It's not exactly storing data as sound waves, more like storing data in the same way as you'd store sound, but I will link to an 8-bit guy video in the description if you want more technical details. Anyway, there's still more loading to do, but let's shorten the process a bit and skip ahead. Yes, this is the big disadvantage of tapes. And finally, we are loaded, so let's type run and get going. And this is Crab Game. It's a little bit underwhelming compared to what you might be used to on the NES, that's true. It's definitely very sparse, but on the other hand, compared to a lot of these sorts of instructional games written in BASIC, it's actually pretty impressive. Let's cut in some emulator footage so you can have a better look. The graphics are quite nice and it runs pretty smoothly, but well, Famicom Basic has major limitations. The original version had just 2K of RAM for the user, and even the upgraded V3 version only managed to increase this to 4 kilobytes. Not a huge amount when you consider even the very smallest NES titles would have had at least double that for program data. There's other restrictions too, though clever programming did manage to get round many of them, so let's move on to some more impressive stuff. But before I do, can I just ask you to subscribe if you haven't done already? That would be great, and hey, why not hit that like button too? So let's take a look at a game called Pen Pen, one that comes from the dedicated basic programming magazine MyCom Basic. This was a Japanese computer magazine that published basic program listings of games that you could type in yourself and then save on your own cassette. Yes, this was a thing back then for anyone who doesn't remember it, typing in the code line by line from a printed listing. I think most of these games were user submitted. I mean, that's how homebrew games got around in the days before the internet, and the magazine covered dozens of systems, Famicom Basic being just one of many, but still it does show that this must have had a reasonable amount of popularity in Japan. This loads in just one part thanks to it using some features that are limited to Basic V3, so let's type run and get going. And yeah, this is a sort of clone of a game called Binary Land. Again, it's not bad considering it's a type it yourself basic listing. Anyone who remembers being hunched over a computer for hours typing these sorts of things out and bug fixing them will tell you that this is really not a bad result for a basic game like this. It's a testament to just how well thought out Famicom Basic was that this sort of thing is actually possible. In fact, this is the original listing from the magazine and it's amazingly succinct. It's been a while since I've done any basic coding to say the least, but I'm amazed that this is all done in such a short listing. Anyway, let's move on again, and this is called Brick Break, an obligatory Breakout clone. Yeah, I've foregone the loading on this one, I'm sure you've got the idea by now. And again, this is really not bad and surprisingly smooth for a basic game. I think there are multiple levels, but the only time I managed to clear the first one, it crashed on me. Still, that's the joy of basic, isn't it? If you want to, you can dive straight in there yourself and fix the game's code if you really want to. Famicom Basic magazine really delivered over the years for Family Basic fans. This is a game called Metal Arms from 1990. Later games started to really get quite complex as people got a grip on programming for the family computer like this with some very inventive stuff. Another of the limitations for the system was its graphics tile set. Yes, you couldn't just freely design your own graphics for games, you had to make everything up from the set of pre-made tiles built into the ROM, and here it is. This meant that coders had to get pretty creative if they wanted to break out of the boundaries, actually not a million miles away from the limited character graphics of systems like the Commodore PET, but quite a bit more colourful. This is a game called Act Hands, a Tetris-style puzzle game, which seems to be based somehow on Japanese rock, paper, scissors, but I can't quite grasp it. Still, it's darn good considering it's written as 100-odd lines of BASIC. It's even got some sort of two-player battle mode. But now this is where we really start to see what Family Basic could do. Sort of. Yes, one of the big restrictions of Family Basic is the fact that it's BASIC, a programming language that has many flaws, but to cut a long story short, it's not really very fast or very efficient. Even this quite well realised dialect from Hudson Soft has serious limitations, but Family Basic games didn't have to stick with BASIC. This is a game called Metal Itou from a guy named Koichi Yoshida, who would later go on to program the legendary game Cho-Ren Sha for the Sharp 68K. But he also pioneered something that became quite a big feature of the later years of Family Basic: machine code. Although it wasn't well documented, Family Basic did support code written directly in actual 6502 machine code, which greatly increased what was possible. This is how actual commercial games for the NES and Famicom were programmed, and it allowed for stuff like this crazy boss, very nicely done and not possible in just plain old BASIC. And now we're looking at something that's much closer to commercial games, actually probably as good as what was sold on cassette for many systems, even if it wouldn't worry Konami or Compile. Still, you might call this an early bullet hell game, and well, it does have a lot of bullets, an impressive programming feat by any standards. So let's take a look at another game from the same guy, Zacner II, once again making heavy use of machine code. If you take a look at the magazine listing for this game, well, it doesn't really make a lot of sense as it is. This is not BASIC for the most part, but pure machine code encoded as Japanese katakana characters. You type it in and save it to tape in the same way, but how it works is much more obscure to the end user. It does make for a fairly elaborate game though, even if it can't get around all the Famicom Basic System's problems. Games are still limited to the same graphics tiles, but some clever coding expands what can be done. These lasers are pretty amazing. It's incredible to see so many moving objects on the NES. Clever stuff that makes use of background graphics to draw them. This game appeared in Micom Basic in 1993, but Famicom games were published by the magazine until at least the end of 1995 and maybe longer. That was the latest issue I've been able to find online, but the magazine did carry on after that. But that's pretty incredible when you consider that the last official Famicom game came out in 1994. I really thought I'd have a hard time finding games to demonstrate on this thing, but there's loads out there and even more to be discovered, though many of them do come from Micom Basic magazine. A lot of them have been actually typed out, edited and made available online by a group called the Typing Task Force, linked to the video game history preservation group Gaming Alexandria. Thanks to those guys, and I'll put relevant links in the description. Quite a bit of this stuff is on the Internet Archive if you want to check it out yourself. Again, I'll put some links below. Someone named Ozidual or Ozidual seems to be responsible for that, so thanks to them. Yeah, there is loads more I could say about the whole Family Basic computer keyboard and the Family Basic language, but I think I'm going to leave that here for now. For one thing, I am absolutely fed up of trying to load stuff. This is not the most reliable system ever. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, but getting stuff to load took a lot of trial and error, and I am pretty used to loading stuff from tapes. There is an official Famicom cassette recorder that I don't have, but it is just a Nintendo branded cassette player. There's nothing special about it, it's just a standard tape machine. This should work fine with any tape player. I think if anything I've just overcomplicated things with my setup. If there's any interest on the topic of the NES as a home computer, well, I might do more videos on the subject. There's the whole programming aspect of it that I could go into, as well as the technical details behind it. There's also a few other uses for the cassette input on the Famicom that might be worth looking at. If you still don't believe me that this works on the NES, well, I will link to a video showing that very thing in the description. It is absolutely possible, and not only that, it seems almost certain that the advanced video system Nintendo had planned was just going to be a localized version of this. If the NES computer had actually debuted, well, it would have been this basically, with the same capabilities and probably the same sorts of games you could load on tape. So let's finish this one now. Thanks so much to my patrons as always. If you would like to join them, that would be really great. There's a link below, and I'll say, as I often do, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.